Growing up, my dad loved to call me God's kid. The reason why was because moments before my scheduled abortion, my mother felt something divine and holy moving within her. She said it was God intervening, and she changed her mind. Never married and hardly a couple, my parents made their final split when I was 6 years old. That split marked the fragmentation of worlds I would grow up in. At my dad's, it was common for a tweaker to drop in unannounced, coming down from meth and looking to buy a bag of swag weed. At my mom's, every Sunday I'd be flanked by Pentecostals, speaking in tongues and detailing prophecies of the rapture. It's hard to imagine a starker contrast of realities to grow up in, but there was one thing that both parents consistently reflected to me. I was God's kid. The Pentecostals scared me more than the meth heads. They projected vivid scenes of eternal hell into my developing psyche. Before I'd hit puberty, I had already learned my mom's tragic stories of her 2 back alley abortions. They were heartbreaking stories. In her words, they were the greatest regrets of her life. The messages I received is that nobody should be able to have abortions, that abortion is a sin punishable by God, something a woman pays for the rest of her life. My takeaway? I was almost an abortion. God rescued me. I could never have an abortion. When I was 17, a close friend of mine got pregnant. In a trance of hatred and denial, she was bootlegging DIY miscarriage cocktails of Robitussin, Boone's Hill wine, Mad Dog, and cigarettes. Concerned for her safety, I offered to help her get an abortion. That was a 4-hour drive away from us. I decided through that process that women should be permitted to have safe abortions, just not me. 5 years later, I was a senior in college. I felt on top of the world. I was thriving in academics and leadership, and I had just begun dating a sweet, sensitive artist-musician named Ben. 2 months into our relationship, God's kid got pregnant. My whole life at that point had been about advocacy for women's rights. I worked at the Women's Resource Center on campus, studied women's studies and criminal justice, and I volunteered at the local women's domestic violence shelter. But somehow I was unable to advocate and create space for myself in this arena. Mortified by my reality and guilt petrified, I decided to confess to my father. Not Almighty God, but my dad Ray, a man with a pot belly and an insatiable love for cannabis, Coca-Cola, and Little Debbie's coffee cakes. I started bawling as soon as I heard his voice pick up the phone. He was emphatic in telling me that I had a choice. Rationally, he was right. But subconsciously, I could not shake the fear of eternal hell, damnation, and condemnation from God for undermining my existence. Still flanked by fear, but with my dad's blessing, I scheduled the abortion. Ben drove me to my appointment. It was a bright and chilly fall morning. Outside were deciduous trees whose vibrant leaves were igniting the day, singing choruses of colors before letting go of their branches to die. I imagined God was going to drop me like that. I'd be cast off like one of those scarlet leaves left to rot under the snow. God is going to leave me. I sat down and took in the boring brown room of the doctor's office. As I laid down, I felt my whole body clenching and wincing. As the procedure began, I repeated a silent mantra in my head. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. I was bracing to be punished, but what I felt, what I experienced, was a warm wave of peace washing over me. It was as if the sun had risen into that room, and it was illuminating the walls of my heart, warming me. I felt soothed and very confused, because this was something holy showing up at a time when I thought I was walking off a cliff. 7 years later, I was shaking my head as I watched 2 bright red lines come into focus on my 3rd consecutive positive pregnancy test. This time with Ocean, a man 4 years younger than me. At that point in my life, having a baby together was a hard no, but for him it was an emphatic yes. I drowned out my resistance because I thought abortion was a decision that had to be consensually made. We stumbled forward with the pregnancy and we told our parents. There was a point when my dad had offered maybe we could buy a trailer, park it on his land, and have the baby. Conjuring up this image made me want to crawl into a corner and die. Months later, Ocean came home very drunk, late, just fired from his job. He crawled in bed on top of me, sneering and daring me to get what I wanted, an abortion. When I pushed him off me and ran to the stairs, he dragged me down them by my ankles. He had lost his vote. The next morning I called my dad, and the call after that was to a local clinic. Now into my 2nd trimester, I cursed myself for not listening to myself sooner. Everybody, including my mother, knew about my pregnancy. I fell into a familiar trance of deep shame. But when I got to my appointment, I was met by a stream of women whose compassion was able to begin to thaw the icy layers of self-hatred I had trapped myself under. As I was getting prepped for the 2-part, 2-day procedure, a woman said something to me that shook me from my trance. She told me the choice I was making was a loving choice. That had not occurred to me. For a 2nd trimester abortion, I'd be given an anesthetic. I woke up alone in a light-filled room, the sunlight of the morning streaming onto my bed. I felt I was in a holy place. As I got dressed, I felt calm. I felt a compassion for myself I hadn't felt in years. I walked to the street, found my car, and found Ocean sleeping. I rapped hard on the windshield and jolted him awake. As he rubbed his sleepy eyes and said nothing on the drive home, I knew with every cell in my body that I had made the loving choice. I lied to my mom and told her that I had a miscarriage. I lied to her to protect myself. These were not choices I was going to regret. These were choices that had given me my right to my life. I had 2 abortions. After I married the love of my life, my husband Stuart, I had 2 miscarriages. I learned the paradoxical reality that women don't always get to choose. But I didn't think I was getting punished by God. My dad had passed away earlier that year, and I knew I was still grieving. I trusted the intelligence of my body, and I did things to support it. In 2013, we were living in Malaysia, and I felt ready, and my body felt ready. Together, we consciously created a pregnancy. I birthed my baby boy with no pain meds or epidurals. I didn't take the meds because I wanted to stay present and connected to each jolt, lull, pain, and pleasure of the process. But after 35 hours of no sleep, I was so exhausted. I surrendered. I closed my eyes, sank my body into the birthing pool, and submerged myself entirely under the water until only my nostrils peeked out of the water. I went deep inside of myself, and I found that little life inside of me, and I whispered to it, "Okay, baby, I will follow you." The arrival of our son was so outrageously holy and so full of grace that even my sweet and thoroughly atheist husband, Stuart, was bowled over and bewildered by the holiness and divinity of his arrival. Becoming a mother has been the greatest choice and the greatest joy of my life. I thank God that I was able to make this choice when I was ready with the one I was in love with. I will always be God's kid because we are all God's kids. And I thank God for safe, compassionate, and legal abortion providers.